no more than 99 pages of a book, and then we live stream a discussion with awesome panelists and Q&A right here. Even if you can't squeeze in the reading, that's okay. You got 99 problems. Reading ain't one. If you enjoy this conversation, please consider subscribing on our YouTube channel. We also are broadcasting on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at 99 Pages Club. And very shortly, you'll be able to listen to us on your podcasts with the 99 Pages podcast, where you'll be able to hear the audio of this session. So we are right in the middle of reading the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson about the plight of the Black community here in the United States. I wanted to take Labor Day off for our panel and try and take a look at another one of the societies which Isabel Wilkerson references in her book, and that is the Indian caste system. So today what we're going to do is bring on a giant panel of really diverse and experienced experts who can talk about the Indian caste system. And I'm really excited to introduce them here today. So first, I'd like to bring in Mr. Srinivas Reddy. So Srinivas Reddy is a visiting professor of religious studies at Brown University and IIT Kandanagar, and very excited to have him on the show. I'd also like to make sure we spotlight Mr. Shrinik Rao. So Shrinik is the editor-in-chief of the Madras Courier, Madras Presidency's first newspaper, founded in 1785. And even in 2018, it actually beat out The Hindu for the top digital news platform in India. And we are just so grateful for him to be here. Next, we're going to have Mr. Tej Nanduri. He is a macro investor working on global macro trends. You know, he is a father and living in London, and attended Stanford University. He's lived all over the globe, as has everyone on the call. And so we're very grateful for him being here as well. And then lastly, we have Mr. Subhash Lingareddy. He is an entrepreneur and the president and CEO of Asamim Biosolutions. He's based in Hyderabad, India. He's exceptionally well read. And what I love about both Subhash and Tej is they both have this entrepreneurial, free market capitalist perspective on caste. They're building businesses and investing within India or the Indian diaspora around the world. And that perspective is incredibly valuable for understanding the socioeconomic disparities between the Indian castes across the globe. So first, I would like to direct my first question to Srinivas. Srinivas, I would like to see if you could give us just a brief synopsis of India's caste system.
Well, the caste system is not a man-made system. In some level, it's about a kind of organizational system that governs life, like a way a family works. You know, you have parents, you have children, you have elders, you have younger people. Different people have different roles in the house. So some people might be good at, doing outside work. Some people might be good at doing inside work, whatever. All different kinds of division of labor, in a sense, to lead a harmonious life. Like the way that bees organize themselves. Okay, there's many workers, there's one queen, whatever, like that kind of thing. All different kind of species organize themselves, and different plants organize themselves in certain ways. Different human societies organize themselves, civilizations organize themselves in different ways. And as we are learning in this book, there's a kind of caste system that is a hierarchical system. So again, she talks about all this in the book, caste coming from the Portuguese. This is a Portuguese word. This is not an Indian word by any means. So again, the idea itself of a caste system, one has to understand the construction of that is coming from the other.
Subhash, I think for many, it's confusing how caste can have both economic and religious parallels. So I'm curious from your perspective, how and why are they so intertwined? Why should one's occupation or their contribution to the economy have anything to do with their religious purity or their station in caste?
So I think, when caste started off, and again, maybe 2,000 years ago in India, it was the four Varna system, right? So you had the priests, you had the warriors, you had the merchants, and then you had people doing all the other menial jobs. Varna system is more a hierarchy. And then you have the Jati system, which is your own sub-tribe. So there have been some movements of people, like, for example, especially in the South, it was quite fluid. The Varna system was not sacrosanct in the sense that you had Shudras who were kings, who were warriors. So the work that they did not actually match up to the original Varna caste system. But it kind of continued, especially for Dalits who were excluded from the caste system, doing a lot of menial work like cleaning toilets or removing dead bodies of animals. That kind of continued. And they never moved up the economic ladder, if you will. But if you follow the story, I mean, like basically you had a rigid hierarchy and you had certain jatis that kind of moved up these Varna hierarchy, but some of them were excluded from this. So that's why you have that both the religious and the economic differences.
And do you find that as an entrepreneur today, like, do you still see caste as a symptom, or as a leading indicator of where people end up professionally in their contributions to society?
Well, most cases, yes. In terms of education, in terms of how you, what kind of jobs you get into, people are not explicit in asking about caste, but definitely, I mean, it's not. People get excluded. Companies are branded as castes because they hire from their own caste. So it's still there. To give you an example, in the previous government, there was a movement to actually get private sector have the same affirmative action reservations as they have for government jobs. And there was a huge hue and cry, and the government said, let's do some sort of self-certification. And very few companies did the self-certification to say, okay, what is the, I mean, are you hiring enough? I mean, pretty much like what you do with affirmative action, the declaration that you give in the US. And very few companies complied with that. And now, I mean, that's not even a compliance issue.
So, I mean, another very interesting parallel with reservations being similar to affirmative action, like it's a way to sort of reshape and maybe break some of those barriers between castes so that you can have a little bit more mobility professionally.
Yeah.
Shrinik, I would love to ask you a question here. So, you are a journalist, and, I think that I imagine in your role as the editor-in-chief of the Madras Courier, you pay attention a lot to Indian policy. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit about the nature of caste in India today from a policy perspective. How are these castes treated, and does it vary among each of the states?
Let me start by my understanding of caste, ideas of caste. I think the caste system, the word may be a foreign word, but the system in itself is a system of discrimination embedded in the social architecture of society, institutionalized through religion. And as a journalist, as a working media professional, I see this in everyday life in India, thousands of years later. When I say it's a system of discrimination embedded in the social architecture of the society, I'd like to raise questions about why certain sections of the society were forbidden from accessing knowledge, right? You will see the same thing expressed today. The question of seeing caste through the lens of political parties or political action becomes relevant only if we understand caste through the lens of power and hierarchy. In the recent past, post-independence, the fact that caste discrimination is illegal has made a difference to a certain extent. And if you look at the evolution of caste, it's now more a socio-economic, religious, and political of organization, more like, which is used every day for gaining political power, for gaining economic favors, for gaining some sort of special treatment by people of all castes. So you will see in the recent past, there are certain castes in India are categorized as quote unquote dominant castes. The anthropologist M.N. Srinivasan came up with this concept of dominant caste, which is people who are traditionally lower in the hierarchy have and live in positions of power. Across the country, you will see that there is a sort of ascendance of the traditional castes which were considered to be a part of Shudra castes to become a dominant caste. But that doesn't in any way take away the fact that there is embedded institutionalized architecture of discrimination in the Indian society.
So it's actually a great segue to my next question, which is, here in the United States, we have this concept of individual versus institutional racism to differentiate between racist behaviors of people versus policies that, even without mentioning race, or in this case, caste, can have disparate outcomes. And so I'm curious if a similar parallel exists with caste, policies that may inadvertently subordinate one caste against another without explicitly even mentioning caste.
In my view, I think comparing the United States to India and calling it the same, you can draw parallels, but you can't really call racism and casteism to be the same. There are many instances where you can identify both individually and institutionally areas where you can see caste play out. Take, for example, the role of priests in temples, right? The very fact that priests in temples are always, most certainly, of a particular caste is indicative of institutionalized racism, right? But it is not necessarily talked about in law. There is a legal definition. People of the lower castes are called scheduled castes. So it was adopted in 1935. I guess this is something that the British did. The British listed the lowest ranking Hindus or Hindu castes, appended to the Government of India Act as a statutory protection. One could argue that the system of affirmative action or reservations or positive discrimination could put people of other castes at a disadvantage. But on the other hand, you also see a system that is continuing for thousands of years. And it's very difficult to a granular level about what exactly a policy can do institutionally. Sushil Kumar Shinde, he became the Home Minister, the Union Minister in Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao's government. Today, if you look at the President of India, he is of a lower caste. He's a Dalit, right? So most of the time, the use of caste is tokenism, right?
Tokenism, yeah.
In an attempt to usurp power.
The arguments against affirmative action here in the United States is that, if you make space for a token Black person, token minority, token female, they inherently carry with them the baggage of, oh, you wouldn't be here if it weren't for your, demographic status. And it can inherently carry like this, it can almost insulate the inferiority complex that comes with caste or race, etc. So thank you for that, Shrenik. Tej, I would love to bring you in. You're an investor, global macro investor. You're paying attention to trends all over the world. I'm curious, how does caste translate to the various Indian diasporas you've seen across the globe? There's obviously a large one here in the US, in the UK where you live, in Africa, in East Asia. There's, groups of Indians that are all over the place. Does caste persist in these other areas? And if so, why don't people of various castes just band together when they're the only Indians in the country,
So I think you need to understand, or at least the people who listen to this need to understand the role that caste does play in India to understand how it translates to the diaspora communities. First of all, it's old, right? It's millennia old. The second thing, so it's not that easy to get rid of. It precedes modern science by at least a millennium. And despite a lot of the issues around discrimination, some Indians have, like Srinivas would be one of them, have a very philosophical view of caste. Like it's some sort of, fulfilling of one's duty that one gets through birth. So it's, first of all, it's not considered bad uniformly. That's one of the reasons people do not have a problem with it. The second thing is people derive a lot of benefits from caste domestically in India. right? So you get jobs because of caste, you get capital because of the caste that you're part of. You know, various kinds of, you get representation sometimes. You know, representation has become very tied to caste nowadays in India. And this representation has predated democracy in India because, as you know, people aligned around their group and represented themselves to whoever the local ruler was. So, you know, there's a lot of things, you know, economic, social, and you know, socially, let me talk a little bit about that as well. Society penalizes everything that moves away from the caste system and rewards everything that is done, you know, to reinforce the caste system. So, you know, people get a lot from caste. They don't necessarily view it as a bad thing. And a lot of castes are fiercely proud of their caste heritage. You know, it isn't like people are trying to hide their caste or whatever. They are openly stating, you know, I'm such and such caste, and I'm proud. So number one, you know, and so let's go to the diaspora now. So among first generation diaspora, this caste carries through strongly. So typically the first generation people are the ones who have experienced the benefits as well as the bad things of the caste system. And they view it as a gateway to greater economic opportunity, greater representation, greater ability to influence policy. So they orient around caste and they carry these memories. They carry what they see in India to wherever it is that they move. Now, here's where, once they move there, so the older ones, you know, so if you look at the older diaspora, like the African diaspora or, you know, Indian diaspora in Africa, I mean, or in Fiji or in Mauritius, I think caste is broken down there. You know, I'm saying this as a layperson. I haven't conducted a survey, but it is not obvious that after generations and generations of being in a foreign country, caste persists. It is where there is, you know, people who are coming from India continuously, like the US has seen that. They bring their ideas of caste with them. Again, let's look at India to see where caste is weakened to understand how this may play out in the diaspora, right? Caste weakens, I think there are three drivers for it. There may be more, maybe the others can jump in. Urbanization. Caste is fundamentally a rural thing because it depends on your ability to physically separate people and maintain different culture in terms of diet, in terms of how you know, what are your duties, in terms of even language. Even people who speak the same language have a different way of speaking based on caste. And so caste, you know, now when you take that to like a crowded urban environment, it immediately breaks down. You don't have the physical separation that you used to have in villages. You're interacting with everybody every day, people from different castes. It's not easy to maintain stereotypes in an urban environment about various castes. And the third factor, most important factor, is misogynation. You know, caste is essentially about endogamy. If you, caste is broken when you go and marry someone from a different caste. So if the more opportunities there are for misogynation, the weaker caste gets. So I see caste as, you know, in the diaspora communities, I mean, it's a generation or two away from, I think, completely breaking down. And there's another thing, there's another element playing out over here, which is that the first generation that moves over there, if you're a new immigrant from India, you're going to look for kinship somewhere, right? So you have these cultural associations, etc. And these are, it's an unstated goal, but a lot of them are there to promote endogamy. Go to any big Indian, like, you know, cultural association. They're organized around caste because men and women of a certain age will be able to meet over there. Sure, you learn Bharatnatyam or Kathak or whatever, but you can also meet there, you know, meet someone from the same caste background and get married and make more caste babies. So, you know.
So, you know what's funny is there's this show on Netflix here in the United States, which I'm sure Srinivas already has seen, which is what's it called? Indian Matchmaking on Netflix, which has set the stage for a lot of people to their first introduction to.
I heard about it. I don't even want to watch that stuff, man. It's all a waste of time, dude. Again, this whole impression of India, you know, in the Western world is so ridiculously skewed, you know, like America's perception of many countries. I mean, just completely skewed. It's a propagandist kind of thing, you know.
Before we go down that, I do
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay, because I don't disagree. But I think this point he's making about endogamy is really interesting, because this desire for endogamy is almost evolved with technology, right? When we look at Bharat Matrimony or Shadi.com, like, you know, everything from your, I think it's called a gotra, you know, your like star alignment, your, you know, astrology plays a big part of it, caste plays a big part of it, like all of this stuff, which is, you know, for my modern Western upbringing, I'm like, what are we talking about here?
To many Indians, those things are absolutely essential. Yeah. Absolutely essential. I mean, the star alignment, for example, is a deal breaker. So that one was always checked early, because otherwise, no dice. And you know, this is how millions of people organize their lives. It's very deep.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I love what Tej is saying about endogamy, and it's like that purpose is to insulate the caste, and we've created sort of structural norms and institutions around, like he's saying, kind of, you know, creating those opportunities to keep people together. You know, Subhash and Tej. Subhash, I'd love to start this question with you. You know, as a you know, CEO, founder, entrepreneur, isn't caste inherently anti-capitalist, right? Don't the wealthy in India and around the world, don't we want the Dalits to become middle-class citizens, to have money to spend, to invest, to accumulate a little bit of wealth? Why is this suppression still existing, even as, you know, the capitalist perspective in India grows much stronger?
Oh, so that's a tough question. So Tej will disagree with me on this, but I think, I mean, capitalism by definition, if you think it's a zero-sum game, you have to have winners and losers, right? And then so you already have this graded hierarchy. So who would you pick to be your fellow passengers on this winning train? I mean, like, you're just going to throw the other guys under the bus. So I guess that's basically what has happened after India has opened up too. I mean, it's just that the inequality has grown. It's not that higher caste people aren't poor. I mean, like in the US, right? I mean, you have white poor people. So it's not that, I mean, everyone who's upper caste is doing well. Yes, there is a realization that growth is good for everyone, but as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, if you were to pick someone, I mean, you'd pick someone from your own caste because of various reasons, right? Family connections, someone calls and says, hey, this guy wants a job. So you have two candidates, you pick the one that you're familiar with.
Subhash, can I ask a follow-up? And also Tej, and please jump in to answer this question. When you see an applicant, like, you know, in the United States, like, at least per Isabel Wilkinson's framework, caste, race plays, you know, effectively your visual appearance is an indicator of caste. Whereas in India, of course, we have shades of brown, and we come in different, you know, in different skin tones. But like, it seems to me very hard to just on the surface perceive someone's caste, interpret someone's caste. Like, when you are looking at an applicant, when you're in the job market, how does one read another's caste?
So that's tough. I mean, maybe from the name, it becomes clear, but it depends on company to company, right? I mean, so in genomics, I mean, finding the right people is difficult. So we go through a process where we evaluate them and then we select them. But it's quite easy in some companies, which if they're hiring a rigid process, name is a very easy giveaway. So you can tell from the name the caste of the person. So that's one marker that you see. Even engineering colleges, right? As people graduate out, you have instances where the recruiters themselves ask, I mean, who came through the regular category versus the reserved category of the affirmative action. So there is a separation there itself. So there are various markers how you can differentiate. I mean,
understood.
Rajiv, I think one thing that you may not be aware of is it is not considered so impolite to speak about caste in India. People will just come out straight and ask you.
Yeah.
They'll say, you know, what caste are you? It's not considered impolite.
That is very fascinating. So it's not considered impolite to ask, but even if it's in the interests of potentially discrimination, or if it's in the interests of, you know, reservation, it's almost like asking someone to self-incriminate in some ways, or self-discriminate in many ways. So it's still not considered impolite.
I mean, there are some people, I think in certain settings it would be considered impolite. but in a vast number of settings, or in a lot of places in India, it would not be considered impolite in more places than a westernized person would feel comfortable with.
Very
And
interesting.
you also asked the question, is caste anti-capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a nuanced answer to that, which is that in short, yes, but I think capitalism is frequently misinterpreted by people. There's the nuance that I'm talking about is you can be pro-business or you can be pro-market. All right. So pro-business is essentially playing to the entrenched interests. Pro-market is enabling everybody to access markets. Now, when you're pro-markets, generally you're increasing labor mobility, you're increasing opportunities for everyone, you are increasing opportunities for liberty, you're increasing equality. When you're pro-business, you're doing the exact opposite. You're catering to entrenched interests who would like to use whatever policy you're making for their own benefit. And typically, caste is pro-business. You get a suppressed labor market. You are able to use labor look at all the businesses that are really successful in India. Very few of them are based on innovation. Very few of them are based on, great new thing. It is generally a labor arbitrage market. It's a labor cost arbitrage market.
Can we double click on this? Because I think this is super interesting, right? The idea of being cast as pro-business versus pro-markets. And that actually makes a lot of sense and again has a lot of parallels to what, say, sharecropping was in the United States, where it was good for business, it was good for agriculture, but it was not an open market of labor. This is super interesting because right now, India has some of the biggest companies in the world. Like when I think of India and the modern economy, I think of, of course, Reliance and Tata, but then also Tata Consulting Services, we have Wipro, we have, all these IT outsourcing firms. So does caste play a role in these large, companies that are servicing a lot of Fortune 500 companies in the United States? How does caste lead to labor arbitrage in this IT outsourcing community?
What happens is an overall suppression of the labor market by keeping some castes down. The upper, they ensure that the price, the clearing price for wages is a lot lower than what a fair labor market could achieve. So, for example, take the case of, the sanitation worker caste. These people are supposed to go into drains. They're supposed to work in toilets and clean these toilets. And they're, in a way that is also it is presented as an opportunity for them because there's a built-in job. Everybody has to use the facilities and, you get to clean them. Lucky you. But now the way caste makes it a winner-take-all type of situation is if you're born into that role and you have no exit from that role, you're not going to be given another job, then the person who's employing you does not need to pay you a fair wage. They don't need to give you equipment that protects you from the dangers of working in the sanitation world. And you can't exit, so you're permanent labor in that system. And there have been several attempts made to kind of ensure that the sanitation worker caste is not exploited, but the entire system conspires to make sure that the exploitation continues.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that, Tej. Wow. It's really fascinating. Shrinik, I'd love to bring you back in here. As you observe this framework, which Tej is proposing between pro-business, pro-markets, we're trying to almost preserve. I'm curious, how does this strike you as a journalist? When you observe your local economy in Chennai, is this happening in your view?
I do see the manifestations of caste in my everyday interaction when I'm in India. Throughout my working life, I have been asked, what caste are you? Or they ask me what my father's name is or where I come from, so that it's a way of identifying who you are, what you are. But going beyond the personal realm, I think you would find that relatively modern seeming industries themselves are also pockets of caste. For example, you take the film industry, the Telugu film industry in India. It is dominated by people of a particular caste, right? Does that mean that they are people of that particular caste are exceptionally brilliant in producing or directing or coming up with creative ideas? Not necessarily, but it shows the system of access to capital. It shows the system of hiring, as Tejasvi mentioned. It shows how even people who love stars are also organized on the basis of caste. Those who like a particular actor love him also because he represents their caste. They hate another actor because he comes from a different caste. So the manifestations of caste are ugly as they're fascinating on a daily basis. And I completely agree with Tej when he says that caste has a great influence on the way businesses function. If you sort of think that the capitalist system is meant to give equal opportunity to everyone to raise, then it is the exact antithesis of that.
If we look at the different types of economic structures in India, and caste is playing such a strong role, Srinivas, I gotta go back to you for this one. It also occurs to me that Islam, Buddhists, Christians, Jains all play a really meaningful role in the Indian population. Like, how do they fit into the economy? How do they fit into the social fabric of India? If clearly one's economic potential is so tightly related to caste.
There is certainly caste expression of caste amongst the Buddhists. I'll put aside the current Buddhists in India, but Jains certainly, and definitely Muslims in India. Caste,
even
again,
Christians, if I may add.
Yeah, Christians. Sorry, you're correct. Absolutely, actually. I mean, the division of Kerala Christians is a perfect example of how Hindu caste structure can follow right into another religion. So it's not about Hinduism. It's not about Islam. It's about a social consciousness about family. I mean, I hate returning to this, but that's the line Gandhi, and that's what it is. It's about a genetics, and it's about a family. Like Shrenik had mentioned, Telugu film industry. If you look at Telugu film industry, if you look at Hindi film industry, what is it? It's a bunch of families. This guy's dad was a big actor. The son becomes the actor. His son becomes another actor. The uncle's an actor. I mean, it's all about families in India and preserving your family's thing. Whatever that thing is, whether it's cleaning the sewers or whether it's doing rituals or fighting wars, whatever it is, it's like, and like Tej was saying, that kind of pride, that it's like a pride almost of a tribalism type of pride, like this is my group, I have this Maratha pride, I have this Rajput pride, I have this whatever pride it is, in your group. So
if I may, I view casteism as a sort of disease which has sort of spread to people of other castes, other religions in India, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, atheists, people who believe in no God and call themselves rationalists, could be castists at core. And you see this as just being more than a family entity, or being more a family enterprise, and it goes into the realm of power and hierarchy, and preservation of hierarchy and power starts. It's easier if you are able to, again, like Srinivas said, if you sort of whip up a sense of tribalism, right? So it's easier to say, you're from my caste, I'm going to give you access to finance. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, so we can grow. Right? So there's an element of truth in when Srinivas says that it's all about family and you scratch your back, but it has to be looked at within the context of power and hierarchy. It has to be looked at within the ideas of subjugation and domination, right? So
if I could just, I agree with you. I think the point I'm always trying to make is caste is one thing. It's an Indian thing, if we want to talk about it in that context. What you want to discuss is power, and that is a fine and important discussion, and I think we should have that discussion. And of course, caste and power overlap, but I think sometimes we get lost in understanding of caste in its kind of social function, and then caste as in that basically discriminatory, tribalist, prejudicial mentality, as you say, a disease in the human consciousness itself, which exhibits itself in all cultures of the world in different ways. I just have one quick point I just want to, because I think a lot of it is about perspective. So for example, I'm thinking about like nepotism. Like in a Western context, this is like a horrible, nasty thing. You can go to jail for nepotism. It's in India, there's no such concept because it's like, who else is going to get everything except me and my family? I mean, from that perspective, from that culture's perspective, there's no concept of nepotism. This is the normal course of events. Anything that wouldn't be nepotistic would be like, what is wrong with this fellow not giving his son his business or whatever it may be? So just my only point in mentioning that is how perspectives come from cultural understandings. And sometimes I feel like, you know, we need to take more time to go back and look at some of the deeper cultural understandings of many of the people, like in some of these, you know, more rural areas that, you know, Tej was talking about, or even in urban areas where it's the same kind of stuff exists.
I think that's a really interesting perspective. I mean, first off, you're discussing almost the, you know what, something that I hear a lot as I've been going on this journey is no one is born a racist. No one is born prejudiced. But the reality is, if it's so pervasive around the globe, like you're saying, Srinivas, what you hit on a word is that you're right. No one may be born racist, you know, in its modern sociological sense, but are we not born tribal? Aren't we not born to protect our own? Is that not like genetically encoded in us? And so in some ways, like there is an organic prejudice that is kind of coded in us, you know, like you said, Srinivas, to protect our families, to protect our own. And that is what we're seeing manifest itself across the globe. Exceptionally wise. Thank you for that. You know, Subhash, I would love to go back to you because, you know, you work in the healthcare space, and I'm just curious from, you know, a societal perspective as an entrepreneur working in the healthcare space. You know, we're talking about basically an industry that is geared towards delivering health outcomes to people. And I'm curious, do you find that caste serves as a layer of discrimination even in providing life and health services to people? Like when you run your business and you go out and service hospitals with your technology, you know, to what extent are people actually able to provide adequate health outcomes across the caste system, or do you find they're disproportionately applied to one caste versus others?
So, I mean, like Shrenik said, it's there in every sector. So I don't think healthcare sector is any different. You have people pick doctors by their caste, people pick hospitals by their caste, and the public healthcare in India is a mess anyway. The less we talk about that, the better. So, yeah, in healthcare, unfortunately, is like any other industry in India. So, caste is everywhere, even in the healthcare industry. You have people not wanting to be treated by Dalit doctors. You see various examples of that. And also one of the reasons that people state that they don't want to go to public healthcare facilities is because you have Dalit doctors who come in through affirmative action, who end up in public service. So it's everywhere. And because of strong connection between caste and economic reality of most people, you see the health outcomes also, I mean, which are quite unequal across society. So it's no different than any other sector.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. So folks, we're close to the end of this discussion here. What I'd like to do is just kind of go around the horn and, as all of you gentlemen have lived and seen caste at play at various elements of your careers and lives, I'm curious if you could offer some guidance and maybe some advice. If you were, as outsiders or Americans in yourself, Srinivas, I know you're here in Providence working at Brown, but as folks who are observing what's going on in the United States, knowing what you know about the Indian caste system and seeing what you see in racial tensions here in the United States, I wonder if we could, potentially postulate on some advice. Like, what would you advise citizens who are feeling some angst, and how would you advise us to behave? Shrenik, I would love to start with you, and then maybe go to Tej, Subhash, and with Srinivas.
The fundamental idea of racism is embedded in equality of opportunity. The more you enable equality of opportunity, not only as tokenism, but in reality, the better it gets for the entire social cohesion, right? Understanding the idea of race in the context of caste definitely helps, but to sort of mix the two together and see it as the same institution of hierarchy may not necessarily be the right way to go about it.
Very helpful. Tej, may I give you the floor?
Yeah, sure. So this may be my personal bias, but I have a lot of I put a lot of value in classical liberal thought. So David Hume particularly, and if I see the big difference between the United States and India is that India is an ancient culture. It has to deal with the ancientness of its culture, and and not all Western frameworks might apply to it. But the United States was created on the principles of classical liberalism. All men are created equal, even though the writers of those words did not have, did not consider women or Black people equal. But the thing is that I think ultimately classical liberalism will say a society is good when it promotes justice, liberty, and equality. And to the extent that, so if I were an American, whenever I saw something that came in the way of justice, liberty, and equality, I would fight against that. And if you choose not to make that choice in a few hundred years, I think you will have a society where, you have, it could be something like Indian society, which is into which, caste kind of becomes baked in, and there's a flip side to it in India, right? There are two categories of people who think that, caste is an issue, and people who actually think caste is pretty good. I like caste as it is, there's that stream of thought as well. So it isn't as if, Indians are looking at caste and saying, oh, this is an evil that we need to get rid of. There's a lot of people who find a lot of good things in caste in India. And if America wants to preserve its, liberal framework, and where it values justice, liberty, and equality, it will have to preserve those values. If not, you're going to get ossified privilege.
Thank you. Yeah. Subhash, would love to give you the floor.
Sure. So I think, I agree with Tej. So I would say a vast majority of Indians are very comfortable with caste, the way it is. So you're not going to see major outcries like people supporting Black Lives Matter, saying everyone should be equal. And people are very comfortable with the graded hierarchy, unfortunately. So my solution, and Tej and the rest, most of them know, is basically mass intercaste marriages. That's you can trace the root of the caste system to endogamy. So if you can get rid of that, maybe that's a solution in the US too. And I think that's how the laws were in the US for a long time, right? I mean, you couldn't marry in interracial marriages, and who gets classified as white, even if you had one drop of non-white blood, right? So I think, I mean, that could be a solution, but yeah, I mean, it would take generations for that to happen.
You know, it's so interesting how endogamy has come as such a critical component of both these systems in the United States and India. I've learned a lot today. Srinivas, would love to give you the final word.
Thank you, thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, everyone. But I'll just say one small thing, which I've been doing myself more and more is I really would encourage all Americans, all Indians, everybody to learn and read more history, just basic history of like events that happened. Like your friend had mentioned the other day how in Wilkerson's book she learned about the I think the first and largest race riot in American history that no one ever talks about. So just I just wish that we would do more as a society, as a country, you know, to make these good things available. For example, Eyes on the Prize. I remember when I was a boy learning about civil rights for the first time, that was on TV, PBS. Watched it every day in class. It was amazing. I mean, everyone should watch that again. Everyone should watch 13. Everyone should watch, you know, Roots. Everyone should watch these things about our history and learn, you know. I really would encourage that. So I think educating yourself is the #1 thing you can do to free the mind.
Well said. I love the idea of ending our session today on those words. Educating yourself is the most important thing we can do to free the mind. Wonderful. Well, Subhash, Tej, Srinik, Srinivas, I just cannot thank you enough for contributing to our growth. This has been a phenomenal discussion, and I know I've learned a lot. I've grown, and I'm just so grateful for your time. And I hope that now that you're part of the 99 Pages Club family, we're going to see you again soon, and hopefully we'll be able to call on you for your counsel, your opinions, and your feedback. So to all of our viewers, and thank you to all our viewers and listeners out there, thank you so much. I hope this was valuable. Again, please consider following us on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and of course on podcasts. We're 99 Pages Club. We're trying to make it as easy for you to find us. We'll come to you. Next week, we're going to be back Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, for a discussion on parts 3,